Hi. Um, I wanted to offer us a few comments synthesizing some of our conversations from the last few weeks of our biodiversity management seminars. Um, yeah, I mean, in the first few weeks, we've been really talking about the concept of biodiversity qua concept. What is it to possess a concept in the first place, particularly when we're doing, science and management. And I think we are just at that point where we're going to, in the coming weeks, really consider a variety of kind of management, conservation oriented management interventions that we use in thinking about the conservation of urban biodiversity in particular. So these comments are just to kind of mark, I think, where we're at in our deliberations. So I'm going to read these notes. They'll be available to you if you want to follow along. Great. Otherwise, maybe just review them later. So, as we've been discussing, biodiversity is a relatively new term for a pretty ancient phenomenon that is the interconnectedness of nature. It refers to the web of life, the great chain of being, all of nature, its diverse entities, and the variety of processes that maintain those entities, over time, and that contribute, of course, to the evolution of nature over the long course. The study of biodiversity is therefore an attempt to conceive of the whole of nature considered as a system. But we, of course, have been asking ourselves whether it's ever really possible to encapsulate, you know, any complex, diverse whole in a single mental representation. Um, so maybe the suggestion here is that most of the ways in which we frame our understanding of the world, particularly when we're thinking about managerial intervention, that each view is going to be a partial view. So, one of the most enduring kind of debates and questions in the ecological sciences concerns a reconciliation of kind of stability and change. Stability maybe kind of at the most extreme being considered, an unchangeable, static view of nature versus a view of nature that sees all of the parts so densely interconnected that everything in nature is subjected to kind of fragility and change. No credible contemporary ecologist, I think, occupies either ends of those extremes, the kind of stasis view or kind of the idea of everything eruptively changing all the time. So, in what follows, I want to evaluate these two fundamentally different partial views of biodiversity as a system. Um, this connectivist view at one extreme and the stasis view at the other end of that spectrum. Both perspectives are caricatures, and yet both of them carry implications for the way in which we might um, conceive of our managerial responsibilities. Since we'll probably agree, I think that reality doesn't easily conform to either one of these poles, we can then ask, I think, what does kind of an intermediate or a balancing of views between views of stasis and views of, fragility and kind of highly, connective systems view? What is this kind of an intermediate view between those poles imply for conservation management. So it is a central thought, I think, and maybe an informal axiom at the very least of systems thinking, that everything is connected. This motto helps us notice, to quote Darwin, how linkages between animals and plants, to use his terms, remote in the scale of nature, are bound together in a complex web of relations. If this view of things is correct, the kind of connectivist view, then this perspective carries a seemingly optimistic implication for the conservation manager. Intervene somewhere in the system, and essentially you're intervening everywhere. Pull one thread and reverberations abound, to use John Muir's metaphor for this. So the extreme connectivist is going to believe that interventions anywhere will affect a system-wide change. One of the complications for the optimistic manager, however, is this: systems in their entirety will not be responsive to intervention, are not as responsive to intervention as a connectivist might expect. At the extreme, a viewpoint that maybe is so extreme that it's kind of a theoretical, maybe a thought experiment. You can envision nature as being so imperturbably durable that any change in the system is really not going to have anything but the most local ramifications. So, in general, I'm calling kind of the viewpoint where management, can at most aspire to changing just an infinitesimally small part of the system. I'm calling this the stasis point of view. Although Frederick Clement's notion of the climax community developed as part of his understanding of community succession, the idea of a climax community being kind of a durable and stable endpoint in the development of an ecosystem, that viewpoint does admit to the possibility of disturbance. Nonetheless, in popular thinking, in the cartoonish way, maybe, in which we think about Clemens, this might be as close as we've ever really gotten to the stasis viewpoint. I think, just to note, that this is a gross kind of simplification of Clemens's views. This maybe is a truism that, any of the scientific views that we have a cartoonish understanding of do some level of injustice to their progenitors. Something to think about. Be that as it may, even the most ardent advocates of a connectivist view recognize that there's some truth in this, that there are some aspects of nature are going to be more connected than others. Thus, the conservation manager, conservationist, must determine where best to intervene in the system. Is the focus on rare species, maybe the native flora, or maybe a keystone species or an umbrella species, or maybe an ecosystem engineer? Maybe management should target vital ecosystem functions or crucial ecological services. So this viewpoint would be kind of recognizing that nature's connected, but some aspects of it are more connected than others, that your task is really to determine the most effective node with the view to identifying those parts of the system that are appropriately connected so that your efforts ramify positively across the entire system. Relying on an overly connectivist viewpoint can lead, I think, to ineffective interventions. and can result in the expenditure of resources on approaches that are doomed to failure. I think it will be a question for us in the coming weeks to determine the degree to which at least some of the management strategies on behalf of conservation that have been deployed over the course of the last 50 plus years, have been doomed to failure because they are not really taking the whole system into view when designing strategies. But on the other hand, the purely stasis oriented approach to management, one that can really risk inaction in the face of some real threats to nature, are equally unfortunate. So when we kind of are so pessimistic about the opportunities that we might have to remediate local, regional, or even global ecosystems because of a faulty understanding that, you know, most systems can't be shifted, that seems to be incorrect also. If, as systems thinkers, we accept that everything is connected, we must ask how any ecological system remains stable at all. So, to be clear, if we kind of alight on the side of the idea that everything is connected and everything is fragile, everything is hyperdynamic, we have to reconcile that viewpoint with the reality that some aspects of the biodiversity of systems, the functioning of ecological systems, is stable and stable for the duration of maybe many generations of the oldest organisms in that system. And it is pretty clear, I think it's undeniable at this point, that there are these durable aspects of nature. Darwin, for his part, kind of recognized that a lot of the creativity in nature kind of arises from the regulation of stability and change. He also recognized, I think, the dangers inherent in overly connected systems, those systems that are so diffuse that it's kind of difficult for anything stable to emerge. He conjectured, for instance, that life originated when the ingredients of life were isolated in the proverbial small warm pool. Actually, for him, it wasn't a proverbial pool. It was, I think, in mind, he kind of recognized that there needed to be opportunities where those prebiotic elements were surrounded by sufficient boundary, that some element of sustained and durable deployment of process allowed for life to emerge, whether or not that is a reasonable conjecture about the origins of life. It's a reasonable recognition of the importance of boundaries and buffering integuments in ecological system, that they can lend stability, even if that stability is ultimately susceptible to change over time. Developing these themes of stability and change, of connectivism and Staticism, not a great neologism, but those themes were developed during the 20th century under kind of the umbrella term systems theory and hierarchy theory, where the hierarchical nature of biodiversity was recognized, and with that hierarchy comes kind of a way of envisioning dynamic stability as well as change when it comes. So it allows us, I think, systems theory, hierarchy theory, allow us to understand the conditions under which durable subunits of nature, of biodiversity, local communities, regional landscapes, biomes, and so on can persist. And of course, it also allows us to understand the conditions under which such durable subsystems of nature can rapidly unravel uh, as change, when it comes, very often comes in kind of a revolutionary burst. So recognizing that ecological systems in general exhibit elements of interconnectedness and a degree of inherent stability suggests that conservation management, effective conservation management, is always going to require kind of a balancing of perspectives and a balanced approach when it comes to recognizing kind of the key ingredients of systems that need to be kind of manipulated in order to restore a system, sustain a system, change a system out of an undesirable condition. So, taking all of these developments in thought, systems thinking, hierarchy, theory, evolution of ecological science, and so on into view, we should be asking ourselves, maybe as a preface to our conversations in the coming weeks, how should the conservation manager, the pragmatist, determine how and when to intervene in the land? If, as a manager, you're aspiring not only to conserving local systems, but also to ensuring that your work contributes to regional goals, maybe even to global conservation efforts, then you must determine how best to act. My suggestion going forward is that the most effective forms of ecological management are going to lie between the two extremes that we've talked about for the last 15 minutes or so. So we'll pick this theme up on Wednesday evening. Looking forward to seeing you then.